drawing. So we're going to kind of transition into a 2-point perspective drawing, okay, and an object that has some dimension, okay. So obviously a book, right? Let me get a little more of an angle there. How do we know that that is a 2-point? How do I know that book that we're looking at, the camera is looking at, right? The camera's a substitute for me, and you, and the observer, or whatever. How do I know that's a 2-point perspective drawing and not a 1-point perspective drawing?
Because we see it at an angle.
We see angles, that's correct. But remember, the piece of paper had angles too.
Parallel line to your self.
Yeah, there's no angle. I guess what David is like, there's no angle on this book that's not an angle, right? Relative to the bottom of the page, right? So everything is, nothing is horizontal to the body anymore, right? So if we move the book like this, I have to look at the kind of monitor at the same time. That's back to the, the piece of paper sitting on the table, right? That's a 1-point scheme. So this edge and this edge would go to a vanishing point way off. Look at how, if you can kind of imagine this, I'll cover it here at the end of the class, but if I were to extend the angle of the edge of this book upward out of the picture plane, they would converge way off of the edge of the drawing. So you can see there's not this really dramatic angle there, right? Okay, it's pretty, right? It's pretty, and this is a 35 millimeter lens I'm using on the camera here, so it exaggerates a little bit. It's a wide angle, considered a wide angle lens, so it's going to kind of even exaggerate those a little more. If you look at it in real life, it probably even wouldn't be that angle there. Okay. Okay, so the difference between a 1-point and a 2-point is the fact that no edge is parallel to your body anymore, okay? So the trick here is we got 2 operations going on. We got foreshortening going on. You always have that when you look at an object setting on a plane, when something's not facing you directly, like hanging right in front of your face. And we have these weird angles we got to start to decipher, even more complicated than before, okay? So the easy way to do that is to take your pencil, and again, you're closing one eye, and all you're doing with your pencil is rotating it left and right to approximate angles, okay? Do not ever, when you close one eye when you do it, do not ever push this pencil in the direction of the plane or the particular angle you happen to be trying to assess, okay? Because the moment you do that, you violate this imaginary piece of glass in front of you that is the picture plane, that is representative of the drawing, right? We talked a little bit about that last class, looking out of a window down the driveway. So the driveway, the long driveway only occupies a short space on my window, okay? So if I put my hand through the window, I'm violating the flatness of the picture plane I'm trying to figure out. Don't ever do that, by the way. So when you're using this as a measuring tool, if you tip it in the direction of whatever you happen to be measuring, whether you're approximating an angle or doing visual measurement, you're violating that piece of glass in front of you, okay? That is the drawing. It's a stand-in for the drawing. So this is a stand-in for the drawing. So when you approximate angles, all you're doing with this is pivoting it left and right to figure out and memorize what that angle would be. So let's go over to the drawing here, or to the object here. I got to turn away when I do this. And by the way, I'm going to draw this out on my Sketchbook Pro application here so you can see how I apply these angles. So if yesterday when I did it, I kept forgetting to go back to this view so you can kind of look at the book. So remind me of that. Say, well, I can't see the book. I can't see the book. So now, tell me what angle would you call that pencil right now?
Vertical,
45 degrees, horizontal?
Vertical.
Vertical, yeah.
Yep, vertical, absolute vertical. So I'm pretty good at knowing what vertical is, and you guys are too. I've tested students endlessly with this, and everybody knows what an absolute vertical is. I don't know why, but it just works that way. We really understand that innately. How about that? What's that? What's the angle of the pencil there?
Horizontal.
Horizontal.
Yep. Oh, there goes my light. That's actually better. Can you see that? Is that all right?
Mm-hmm.
You can still see it, right? Yeah, my light burn out, or the battery, but I kind of like that better. Horizontal. This is the tricky one. 45-degree angle is halfway between horizontal and vertical. Okay, so you got to kind of imagine going to horizontal, going halfway, and then going to vertical. That's a tricky one. I have an overlay here I can put on here. So I can't see it, but you can see how, well, I can kind of. So there's a 45 right there, right? Here's a 45. Right? Is the edge of the book right here? Turning the pencil in space. Is that a 45?
Not an exact.
Would it be more vertical or less vertical than 45?
Just a bit.
Yeah, but see how it's pinching up here? See how when I lay my pencil there,
Because it would be parallel to that line. up
it's
front,
almost parallel.
but not quite.
Not quite. If it was parallel, it would be like that. Okay, so you can kind of see I'm looking at the screen here at the same time. So what I do when I make a drawing is I think about 45 degrees. You know, I'm going to draw a line on this drawing that I don't know for sure, but I'm thinking is probably about a 45-degree angle relative to one of the corners. It's better to envision that relative to the corner of your composition. So I could draw. Let's see how dark this is. Okay, it's like a picture frame. When you think about a picture frame, both of those angles are equal. That join together to make the 90-degree angle of the corner of the picture frame, right? Mm-hmm. So that's not doing it. Okay, that's flatter than 45-degree angle. That's more vertical than a 45-degree angle. So you got to start thinking about what is a 45-degree angle, you know, the halfway point between vertical and horizontal. That's pretty good. That's not bad. So if you can kind of envision that using the corners of your drawing as you draw, you know, it's kind of a nice little tool. You know, you could even put lines down there in the corners just to kind of remind you of that. It's not a bad thing to do. Almost like, and then at the end of the drawing, you can just kind of make a picture frame, right? Draw the picture frame. It's not a bad idea to do that, okay, if you want to do that. Okay. So let's go back to the view of the book. So if I didn't have this grid here, my mind, remember the grid, all the grid's doing is reminding me of the flatness of the drawing. You have no choice in your drawing to draw into the drawing. Your only choice in making a drawing is moving around the picture plane, right? So when you draw a line, you have three things to consider with that line, for the most part, in terms of the drawing, the whole drawing. How long to make it? What angle is it on the drawing relative to the vertical and horizontal? And where on the drawing is it? What's its position on the drawing? Is it up high on the drawing? Is it down low on the drawing? Is it over on the right-hand side of the drawing? Is it over here? So its position, its length, and its angle when you're doing a perspective drawing of a geometric form, okay? Three choices. Let's go back to the drawing. So when I go over here and I line my pencil up, I've got to understand that that's a little more vertical than 45 degrees. 45 degrees, I'm going to put the pencil in the corner of the drawing here, would be more like that. Splitting the difference between vertical and horizontal. Now that's a subtle thing, but it makes you a better observer of the world if you can understand that. So I know that the what's that called, that part of the book?
Fine.
Binding? The binding? Right?
The spine, I guess.
Spine, yeah, the spine of the book is more vertical than 45 degrees. So let's go to the drawing. Now, if I'm going to fill up my drawing, which I want you to do with this book, make it bigger than life size, 18 by 24 inch drawing, and I want to indicate the angle of the spine of that book with a line. Should I do it over here, or should I do it over here?
The first choice.
Yeah, that's position. I'm going to put it on the right side of the drawing somewhere. Okay. If I wanted to fill up my drawing, if I want to fill the book up with my drawing, right? Should I make the line, so I know I'm going to be over here. I'm not talking about angle yet, but I'm just talking about like filling the book up, or the composition up. Is that long enough?
No.
No. How about that?
Maybe a little big.
Yeah. So you got to start thinking about how long to make the line. That's my point here. So it's position on the paper. Every line you make, it's position on the paper, its length, and then the last thing is its angle relative to the vertical and horizontal. Okay? Here's how I want you to do this, though. I want you to think about these lines as kind of sketches and precise marks at the same time. So you're going to use your straight edge to do this. So you literally have to lay your straight edge on the paper at that angle. That forces you into thinking about angle. This is really important. So the moment I put that straight edge on the paper, and I know I have to put a straight line along that straight edge, all of a sudden I need to make a decision about what is the angle of that straight edge on my paper. Okay? So I'm going to draw the spine of that book right now. Okay? You ready?
Mm-hmm.
Are you sure? Okay. So I'm kind of just now imagining this corner here. I have the luxury of looking at it on a video screen, right? You don't have that luxury, or neither do I in real life, right? So you got to think about its position of things, okay? So let's say a little more than vertical, or a little more than 45. That's too dark. Still a little too dark. Maybe something like that. So I'm planning out, look, I think that I have too much space between the edge of the drawing here. I'm going to get cramped as I move over here in the drawing, right? So I don't like that position. Remember, you have the luxury of having that ruler on the paper. You can kind of think about position of things as you do it. So I'm going to just move it over a little bit more. Now, would you think that's a little more vertical than 45?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think so. Here's a 45. Let's kind of strike that. See that splitting the difference between in the corner there? See the difference between that angle and this angle, right? Okay. So this is how you approximate angles, okay? You think about the angle relative to 45. I don't know why my dog is right under my feet here. And vertical and horizontal, okay? Now, here's the tricky part that I want you guys to do, okay, that the students have the most difficult part with, is making like 5 lines that represent that particular edge rather than one line. When you put one line down that represents a particular edge of something, you've psychologically locked yourself into that one line. And what happens if that one line is not correct? Then your whole world falls apart. Because you've put all your chips onto one line, right? Half joking here, but my point is that if you have 4 or 5 lines that kind of gather like a sketch might, that one of those might be correct with the angle, right? So I want you to, right in that moment, think about, laying down 4 or 5 different marks that might kind of be the right mark eventually. Okay, at different angles maybe. So you start to get a sense of, oh, it's somewhere in there. okay? And I know it's going to end somewhere over here. And I know it's the front corner is going to be somewhere here, okay? So I'm just kind of laying down a bundle of marks here just to start to play with this. But I want you, for every one of those marks you make, to use that straight edge. I saw a student turned in a drawing today, really good student, but I saw what she was doing. She was free-forming it. So she was using just her so the drawing lost a sense of kind of precision because she was just going with her arm instead of laying this ruler down and tipping the angle, and turning the edge with the ruler, okay? We're going to do cross-hatching and parallel hatching drawings. So we're going to use that ruler a lot to kind of build form in the drawing, okay? So get used to using that thing as a tool to make images, okay? It's not just a tool to kind of draw edges. It's a tool to kind of start to fill out the drawing. But don't worry too much about that right now. So what angle do you think this is at, the top of the book? So I know somewhere right in here, I'm going to start to kind of have to create this angle. Just looking at it, would you think that is a 45-degree angle, or is that more towards horizontal, or is it more towards vertical, the edge of this book here?
It's more towards horizontal.
Yep, definitely. That's what I would say. So here's what you would have to do in real life. It's easy to look at the picture and garner that information. But in real life, you're going to have to close one eye. You're going to have to line your pencil up and go to horizontal, go to 45, and go to vertical. So you can start to see that indeed angle is pretty low, right? It's really pretty close to horizontal. Not 45, which that would be right there, okay? So that's angle approximation. Now I go to my drawing and try to duplicate that. I memorize it, cannot do this. I see students do this all the time. They're looking at their object and they'll get the angle, right? They're lining their pencil up with the edge of that object. They're trying to figure out what the angle of the edge of that is. And then they try to take that and go over to the drawing and hold it. And then they go down and the moment you move, it's gone, right? So the trick is to memorize it, clear your brain, go over to the drawing and try to act that out, okay? All right. So it's a kinesthetic thing, meaning body movement, right? Memorization of bodily movement, right? So you're memorizing in your brain the position of your hand, the angle, a little less than horizontal, or a little less than 45. Got it in my head. I'm now going to go to my drawing. Remember that memory. Remember your memory. And try to act it out on the drawing. So let's do that now. So here's 45. What's this? Oh, here's another thing you're going to want to do. That's about a 45-degree angle. I see this all the time. So that a student might tell me, relatively speaking, that is, those three lines represent the back of the book, right? Look what they've done here, by the way. They made this into what? A right angle. If I laid a protractor down on my drawing right now, that would be a right angle. Is the corner of that book in reality a right angle? If I laid a protractor on the corner of the book,
Close to it?
is the corner of that book a right angle in reality? If I laid a protractor right on the book. Yes, it is. It's made of 4 right angles, right? The 4 corners of the books are right angles, right? So your brain is saying right angle, right angle, right angle, right angle, right angle, right angle. So it's going to overpower your skill of observation in that your eye is saying this because you just measured it. Whoop. I'll do it in red here. Your brain's saying right angle, make that more vertical. Your eye is saying this, more horizontal with that angle. So now if I laid the protractor on my drawing, this would no longer be, this would be less than a 90-degree angle, right? So you can see where your brain and your eye are going to kind of be in battle with each other. Brain saying corner of book, right angle. Eye saying, no, I just measured this angle and it's a lower angle, i.e. this is not going to be a 45-degree angle if I laid, or a 90-degree angle if I laid a protractor on my drawing. So this is where you start to, your desire to keep those 90-degree angles in the corner of the book will get in the way. So you got to behold. Not only do I have a tripod to deal with, my dog decided to plant right underneath me here. Okay. And if you did that, by the way, you would just end up with a drawing like this. You ready? Where each of the corners are at 90-degree angles to each other. So that's not in perspective. That's as though the book was hanging by a string of on the corner of the book, right? There's no perspective there because my default was to create 90-degree angles here like the book really is, right? So my brain's getting in the way of what my eye's seeing. My eye's seeing these really weird angles, particularly if I use my pencil as a gauge, where my brain's saying, no, that's just a rectangle, so all those corners need to be 90 degrees. Okay, so be careful. All right, so let me go document that more appropriately now, that back edge. A little flatter, right? See how that's flattening out? Okay. So all of a sudden now I'm starting to get a little bit of sense of perspective going on the thing. Okay. Now, let's do this edge right over here. What does your knowledge of perspective tell you regarding the angle of this opposite edge of this? Should
That they would be parallel.
Well, they are in real life.
It would be more obtuse.
Yes, they're a little more obtuse. They wouldn't be parallel on the drawing. So remember, two parallel lines in reality, as they move away from you, must get closer, right? Like the railroad track scenario. So even though this is a parallel edge to this, I know by default that it's not going to be parallel in my drawing. So will it tilt in? I'll do two lines here. Will it be more like this, or will it be more like this? Think about the direction. Think about which way of the book is getting smaller from me. Which side of the book is getting, which edge of the book is further away, here or here?
Right.
Okay. So which of these lines would be more appropriate? I'm not saying either are correct, but which one of those would be more appropriate in terms of their angle relative to the right edge? The bottom. You're saying this one, David?
Yeah.
Why are you saying that?
Well, because the book is facing towards this way, so this side will look bigger to us, so it will go out at an angle.
So the two edges would appear to get closer to one another as they moved out to the right. Yeah, there's a vanishing point way off the edge of the paper here, somewhere, that these two parallel edges are obeying. Okay, and I'll show you at the end of the session here how you can kind of conceptualize that. So David's right. It would be this one. That book gets smaller as it moves back in space, up on the paper, i.e., right? Okay. Does that make sense to folks?
Yeah.
Obtuse angle makes up for the fact that you're shortening the right angle on the opposite side.
That's correct. So this edge right here, ultimately, right, is further away from me, just like the piece of paper, than the one I'll do down here, right? So that means if this is longer, because it's closer to me, this one's going to be shorter, because it's further away from me. So by default, two parallel lines in perspective have to get closer as they move back in space. Because this is further away, it needs to be shorter. This is closer, it needs to be longer. The converse is correct as well. This is closer to me, generally speaking, than this one. It's a little further back. So then these two lines would do the same thing. We'll get to that in a second. Here's what I see a lot of, though, with students, and I'm not quite sure. I can never quite figure out why. Instead of, they'll do the opposite. They'll make it get wider, the book wider as it moves back in space. So be careful about that. Now, this informs your knowledge of this. This is why we do, these invented drawings to begin with. Informs what you actually see. Watch out, Charlie. In real life. So what angle do you think that is right there that I'm holding the, I didn't. I told you I'd do that. What angle do you think that is that I'm holding the pencil at right there? let's go over and compare it to a 45. That's pretty close to, see how it's coming in off the corner of the upper right-hand corner of the screen?
Mm-hmm.
That's a 45. Let me take that over. That's pretty darn close to what that angle is, right? That's a 45-degree angle. So let's go to our drawing. Let's strike a 45 here. Okay, so that's 45. This was a little more than a little more vertical than 45, right? So if I come over here and strike what I perceive to be a 45-degree angle, a little flatter, in other words, right? A little more horizontal than this one over here, right? Then all of a sudden, what's happening? The correct stuff is happening, right? This distance right here is getting smaller as it moves back in space. Okay, so you can see how subtle the world is. Imagine doing this with a whole room, which we'll do next week. Like you're looking in the corner of your room, you got to figure out what all the angles of everything is, and not only that, but the relative proportion. Okay, so it's easy, as hard as it was, to invent a view of a room, but actually trying to document that as you see it, very difficult, because all these angles have to be appropriated, right? But once you understand where the vanishing points are relative to that scene, it makes it easier to kind of navigate this stuff. Okay, so let's finish the other side of the book here. This edge. So I'm going to put 2 lines down there. Tell me which one would be more appropriate. I'm not going to say that either are correct. That or that.
The bottom one.
Okay, if I do the bottom one, this distance from here to here is bigger than this distance from here to here. And remember, as this part of the book is closer to me than this part of the book. Should it be that way or the other way around?
The other way around.
Yeah, this edge is further away from me than this edge, right? So that means that the angle that I strike has to be struck in such a way that this dimension is shorter. I'm exaggerating here, but this is the principle, than this dimension. Because those 2 edges are parallel to each other in reality, and this is farther away from me back here than this is here. Okay, so your knowledge of that will help you navigate what angle to make that last edge at.
You're visually conceptualizing advanced trig, right?
Yes, that's about it. Yeah, that's about it. I think I would have been good at that stuff. I just never chose to pursue it when I was. But artists are good at geometry and that sort of stuff, I think, generally speaking. So if you have to take a math, go in that direction, that would be my advice to you. So here's the, so I'm now going to approximate this angle here. Now, is that angle, it could be either one of those, right? It doesn't matter. Is that angle flatter than 45 or at 45? Would you say that? Look at the pencil, kind of just in aggregate. That's parallel to that edge.
It looks like it's at 45.
Okay, let's check it out with maybe the corner over here. I'm going to put a 45 coming out from this corner right here. Okay, so I'll go to the corner. Now I'm splitting the difference, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's a 45. I'm splitting the difference. Now let's just slide that over. I would say it's a little flatter than 45. There's the angle, and there's 45. So you can kind of see how imagining what an angle is relative to 45 is really important here. I have the luxury of using the screen. You have the luxury of seeing it on the screen. When you do it in real life, it gets even more difficult, okay? So I'm saying this angle right here is probably a little flatter than 45. Let's check it out with the grid here just to see. I don't think I can move these lines, but you can kind of see there's a 45-degree angle right there, that diagonal, right? Mm-hmm. Right, the diagonal that runs from upper left to right. Look at the angle of that relative to this. Right? See how that's flatter? Okay. So start to see the world in angles, angular relationships. Now you can do this from I call it a point-to-point angular relationship, meaning where is this thing in the world relative to this thing in the world over here? I can establish it's back to math again, Al. I can establish a triangulation between objects that exist in the world, and what are those various angles, in projection lines, right? So it's not always edges that you try to create. That's the easy one with this drawing, but you can also, if I had let me just show you real quick here. Put a pen right there, okay, just to illustrate my point. I can figure out, see where the far end of that pen is, okay? I could, on an angle a point-to-point relationship, figure out what the angle is between that and the back corner of the book. What should I do? So what I'm doing is connecting 2 points in space, the back edge of the book and the back of the pen. Is that a horizontal, or is that less than a horizontal, the space between those two things? Or I mean the angle that's created between those 2 points of reference?
It's less than.
Less than, yep. Is it a 45?
Not quite.
No. So what you do, if I were to draw that pen, I would project an angle here, outward. At that, I'd memorize that angle. I know along this line somewhere the pen's going to happen. The tip of the pen is going to be like right here maybe. And that's going to be at a particular angle. So what I'm doing, it gets complicated, I'm telling you, but this is, when you do life drawing, if you ever go into life drawing, this is the only way to learn how to life draw, is point-to-point relationship. So I know the tip of the pen would be there, and the corner of the book is there, and I created an angular relationship between those two. Now, I don't know particularly how far out I would have to go. I'd have to use visual measurement for that, but I have created a point-to-point relationship on angle. So you can see, how much math is involved, back to Elle's point, in terms of drawing, and any art form for that matter, right? Music, certainly. So, okay, let's finish we said this is going to be a little less than 45. There's 45, and it's a little less than 45. So let me strike a series of marks there. Whoop. So I would say that's 45, and just a little less like that, something like that maybe. Now my knowledge tells me that these two angles, so I can't really do it here, but you could literally lay your pencil along this edge and then just slide the pencil up, and you'll find that this will be a flatter angle. Why would this be a flatter angle here than here? Flatter meaning more towards horizontal. Why would this edge of the book back here be more towards horizontal than this one?
Which is this one?
Than the front one right here.
During the front edge?
Yeah.
It's further away.
It's further away, but this is not the one I'm worried about being further away. Why is this flatter? Which it has to do with that notion. Why is this more towards horizontal than this line? What's that conforming to? What's that making these two parallel lines do?
Converge.
Yes, as they move back in space in this direction, right? Because this edge of the book, as Elle pointed out, is further away from me than this edge of the book, so it has to be shorter. So these two lines, as they move back in space, had to converge. So if I already established the edge of this, right, I know I got to think about the edge of this, and this one has to be a little more vertical in its angularity than this one. So the converse is true. This is a little more horizontal than this one. See how, your understanding of where those vanishing points are for these two parallel edges is really important in understanding, deciphering these edges that you're drawing, okay? So left front, right back edge conforms to some vanishing point that's off in this direction. Left back, right front converge to some vanishing points off in this direction. Voila, we got a 2-point scheme here, right? We don't know where those vanishing points, but we know the horizon line is way above the perimeter of this sheet of paper. Okay, and i.e. the vanishing points live on that horizon line. Okay? Now that we've navigated the relative angles of this rectangular form we're looking at, we got to figure out if we have the length of those particular edges drawn correctly. How would I figure that out?
Using your pencil to measure the book.
Yeah, now I'm back to visual measurement, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right? So, and that's all that is the length versus width issue, right? Length of something versus width of something. So what would be two edges that would be maybe I could compare to one another? Remember, always work to the things that are closer to you first when in a drawing. They're the things that are most obvious.
The bottom right edge.
Yep, right here.
Yep.
Versus what?
The one to the left.
Bottom left
Right.
edge? That?
Yeah.
Yeah. Those are two edges close to me. Why not compare those in real life, right? See how they relate to one another. So let's go to our drawing, or our actual kind of object we're looking at. Which one looks longer?
Right.
Which one looks longer? The right one looks longer, right? We know it is in reality, right? So let's test it out. So how would I tell if this is longer than this?
Use your pencil.
There's your measurement, yeah. So I'm going to measure what I perceive to be the short one first, and let's see if it fits into the long one. Now remember the pencil's parallel to my body. Now I'm putting the tip of the pencil here, sliding my thumb up till it gets to here. Now I've grabbed that measurement. Everybody's with me, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I grab that measurement. What do I do with it?
Flip it on its side and measure it on the side.
Yeah, I'm going to turn it relative to this. Okay. So I'm going to start with my thumb at the back corner. And I got one and a little bit extra right there. I can kind of visualize how much extra, right? Just by looking at it, right?
Mm-hmm.
You with me? Okay. So now in my drawing, I've got the angles correct. Now all I have to do is I could do this with my ruler like we did, I can lay my ruler on the drawing and kind of use a unit. So all I have to do is make sure that this unit right here, this unit right there, the length of that, fits into this unit, or the length of this, one time with a little left over. How does that look?
Pretty good.
It looks pretty good, yeah. Yep, looks pretty good. So once I get the length of this thing versus its width of the book established, and I have the angles established, I don't have to go up and measure these edges, right? Because I've got all the angles put together correctly. Those will automatically work together, okay? All I need to know is the overall length of the object I'm drawing versus its overall width, okay? Make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. One more thing. This is not a flat piece of paper anymore. It has a vertical dimension. So how would I show that? I've just drawn essentially a flat plane right now. I've not given any vertical dimension to the thing.
Or you can strike down a vertical at the corner of the book, the closest into us.
Right. So what I could conceive of here, and this is really important, so see how I do this, everyone. Watch how I do this. We're back to drawing the coffee table in the room.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All I need to do is I know I have 4 corners here of the book, and now I could do one of two things. I could either strike a vertical down, which would be this passage right here.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, let me show you. This passage right here, right?
Mm-hmm.
I would do that first. That's what I would do first. Now the question is how tall to make that. How would I figure out how tall to make that vertical line right there?
Do a measurement.
Yep. Let's go to the book and let's figure it out. It's a little bit smaller measurement, but essentially what I'm doing is I have my thumb there. There, I'm grabbing the measurement, right? The pencil's at the bottom. There's my thumb.
We're looking at the
The drawing, not the video.
Well, you know what I'm talking about, right?
Yep.
No, I'm just kidding. Thanks for reminding me. So there it is. Notice the closer I get this, the smaller that increment is on my pencil. So if you can get it further away with these small measurements, it makes it a little easier to kind of handle. See how that like changes? Like that's tiny, tiny, tiny because my pencil's so close to my face. Here it's further away. Remember when you do this, always keep the pencil the same distance when you compare two measurements. So I'm going to measure that, and I'm just going to stack it and see how many times it fits up the length of this. 1, 2, 3, about 4 roughly. You'd be surprised how people get this wrong. So always check that out too. It looks pretty obvious, but I'm getting about a 1 to 4 relationship. Now what I'm going to do instead of this, and I'd kind of like you to conceptualize and I'd like to see this in your drawing if you can, is I'm going to think about this as the surface of the book that's laying on the table, because I'm going to run out of room down here. So instead of, this is a nice conceptualization because it makes you realize everything's a transparent, everything has 6 sides, right? This book has 6 sides, you just don't see them. So as a form, it has 6 sides. So I'm going to go vertical instead. And I'm going to do that with all 4 corners, like we did with the, I don't know how tall to make it yet, but like that. So see how I'm starting to conceptualize this as not just surface, but form. So then I'm going to take a guess. Now, if you had to think about this angle, this line right here, would it pinch in this direction, or would it get bigger as it moves back in space? Would it go
pinch down?
It would, yeah, because this is further away, right? That's too much. It's essentially parallel because it's such a small, thin plane. But it does pinch down a little bit. So think about that stuff as you draw. Same thing here. So that where that intersects that, this would pinch down this way, but that's too much. So maybe something like that. I'm reading this right in here, this as the edge of the book now, okay? So you see how I have choices here, right? The more lines you make, the more choices you have, which is kind of cool, as long as it doesn't get too confusing. So this would be where the top plane cover of the book is, right? Same here, as this moves back in space, it wouldn't do that. It would essentially be parallel to that first edge I drew, and it might pinch down just a little bit because of the 2-point perspective. So now I've conceptualized that book as a multi-dimensional transparent form, 6-sided plane, or 6-sided box or cube, right? So now what we were thinking was the top of the book now becomes the bottom, and the top of the book is right here. So I want to see this on your drawing when you draw your book, just a regular book, but don't, and then you can start erasing stuff, okay? So that you can kind of get rid of that stuff. Don't erase too much though. So let's see how we would erase here. We get rid of this stuff, right? Wouldn't see any of that anymore. You don't have to do this when you draw, but I kind of, because you guys are just starting to navigate this stuff, I would like you to think about it as a 6-sided box, okay? And you saw how quickly and deftly I kind of turned it into a 6-sided box. Just imagining that plane I initially drew, which was, we thought of maybe the top, suddenly becomes the bottom of the cube, right? It gives you a flexibility in the drawing compositionally here. I was able to kind of give myself some room here, both above and below, right? So it had a better balance. So there's the book. Now, and we always want to do details. Now I can start to get into details. In these smaller passages. For instance, this area right here, what happens here is, see how the white pages of the book here set in from the cover? Those 2 points are right above and below one another, and there's an inset here, so I can start to play around with that stuff. I would erase this, restate it. These are detail form issues that are really important in drawing. So let me restate that. Mike. So here's the corner. Here's the corner, okay? And all I'm doing is setting it in a little bit. So I get that kind of overlapping thing starting to occur. And then what happens if you really look closely and understand things is that this tucks in behind, but goes back up to the vanishing point, right? So I get this kind of dimensionality starting to happen here. Not only that, but the thickness of the book has a little bit of a dimensionality to it, right? So the cover has some sort of dimension there, right? So there's nothing in the world that's totally flat. Even that 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper that we drew is not totally flat, right? That has some dimension to it as well. So I can really start to get in and play around with the dimensional detail, okay? That I call this dimensional detail, not just kind of like decorative detail. And there's a big difference between the two when you make a drawing, okay? So now I can go in and gently start to clean up these edges, you know, start to kind of erase some stuff away. You know, I know if that's where the pages of the books now go, that it's going to kind of tuck in here a little differently. Let me kind of clear some of this stuff out, and I'll show you how that would work. Now that I have the overall kind of understanding of the trajectory of this thing going, I'm going to put a few more kind of more certain lines in here. So you go from the unknown to the known in a drawing. So I threw 5, 6, 7, 8 lines down here to begin with because I didn't know what was happening where, right? So now I do. Now I can go redraw this with a little more certitude, as you'll see here. So we'll call this now the bottom edge of the book. I'll just go over that line a little bit more, right? I know that the cover has some thickness, so we'll call this line right here. It's a little too thick, but I'm being dramatic here. And then, let me erase a little bit more away here. So this is the thickness of the book right here. The cardboard, right? The thickness of the cardboard cover. And then I got that area where the pages lay on it, right? So I'll have to draw that. Nope. So where the pages lay across the book, something like that. So I got 3 lines here denoting, you know, then I can go in with shading eventually and start to kind of play with that stuff. But here's if you can kind of see it, thickness of the book here. Oh, it's too thin. This is like a vertical plane right here. Vertical plane, vertical plane. You know, these vertical lines are denoting that. Whoop. Vertical, 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 vertical. And then these are horizontal plane moving back to the pages of the book, right? Which start right there. So everything has a kind of a dimension to it, right? If that makes any sense to you. You know, even, you know, the spine of the book here would have a certain dimension to it and would kind of merge into the, you know, edge of the book like that. And then this would tuck in behind, you know, so something like that, you know. And it has a little indentation here, et cetera, you know, and then that little indentation would go up, and then that would stretch to here, you know, there's kind of a little valley here, and then that would go up to here, and, you know, et cetera, and this would have a dimension to it too, you know, so kind of envision creating a thickness to the cardboard here too, right? Because when you get up here, you know, you want to show dimension there. So, you know, that's the detail stuff, right? That you would want to kind of start to eventually carve out in your drawing, right? That dimensional stuff. But you got to start with the basics. You got to start with this overall these overall really important relationships, right? And we'll move, I don't want you to do too much in this drawing, you know, so like there's a cast shadow along here, you could do some parallel, you know, eventually we'll get into that stuff. But none of this would make any sense if you didn't have the correct angle and the correct proportion to this book, right? From the get-go. That's why you got to break all this stuff down into these simple moves in a drawing to begin with, okay? It's not easy. Not easy at all. in order to understand the object you happen to be looking at, a book sitting on a table. You know, it seems simple, but it's not, obviously. So let's say, like it says, you know, like people always put text on the book. So it says, you know, Barack Obama there. So I can't just go write the letters like willy-nilly here, right? You know, so, you know, I couldn't do, you know, B, you know, that's not in perspective. You know, if I made the B like a, you know, that's not perspective. That's a vertical plane there. So any of the letters I would have to draw on the side of this book to have to be vertical. So the B, you know, would have to look like that. This would have to be straight up and down because verticals are just vertical, right? So all these letters along this edge of the book would be on a vertical axis. Oh, that's not vertical. And they would fit into, you know, a row that happens to conform, it's tricky, to, you know, perspective. So if you can kind of imagine a row of letters, they'd have to all fit in that space right there, right? If I was to do a photograph on the book here, that photograph, like this line at the top of that photograph, if it had a cover or something, I have to think about the angle of this relative to the edge here, right? I got to think about the angle of this relative to this edge over here. Doesn't have one, but so that this photograph that would happen to be on the cover of the book maybe would also conform, because what I can tell you what tends to happen is that when folks kind of move into this, so it looks like that rectangle is laying on the top of the book. I tend to get this a little bit more, you know, like they forget about it and then they start to kind of invent, you know, want to make that look like a rectangle, so they start to forget about the relationships of this edge to this edge, right? So be careful of that if you do some, you know, if you get into a little more detail in your drawing. Okay. Okay. So if I was to draw letters here, put somebody's name, you know, if I like Tom or something, I would have to make sure that the T, top part of the T, you know, was parallel to this, and that the stem of the T, you know, was parallel to this over here, etc. Okay, everything's in. That's how you create that illusion of things setting on other things. So the letter is literally setting on the top plane of the book, etc. Okay. Okay, and that's all established by the angles I create to begin with. All right. Any questions? So in your drawing, fill up your whole sheet of paper, 18 by 24 sheet of paper, bigger than life size. Lay a book on the table. Same process. Make a 2-point scheme. Now, by the way, let me just show you real quick here, just so kind of from a conceptual standpoint, we're almost done. Let me open this back up just to show you. Just so you can get a sense of what's really happening here. So let's imagine that this is the wall of my studio here, right? And that I'm making a drawing on the wall of the studio. So my drawing is this big on the wall of the studio. So there's my drawing, right? I'm going to put it kind of low here. There's the perimeter of my drawing. Hopefully this will work. We'll see. And then here's the book I drew on my drawing. I'll just do a rough little kind of indication of that. Yes, I won't get this perfect, but you'll understand the principle here. So that's the wall of my studio, I wish. Here's the drawing of the book I just made on my sheet of paper, which is denoted by that. This probably won't be 100% correct, but okay. That's the book I'm looking at, right? So I made a drawing of it, and this represents the drawing. So if I could pin my drawing to the wall and extend these lines out on my drawing, it probably won't work perfectly, but we'll see here. Past the drawing, right? This is better than it was the other day, but those parallel edges of those books would converge somewhere way off the edge of my drawing, out in this big world that's out there. And where they would converge would be the two vanishing points that's controlling the angle of those parallel lines as they move away from me. Voila, 2-point perspective for that simple book setting on the table. And where they converge would be on the horizon line, which would be my eye level. Okay? Now, it's not a perfect scenario here, but this is what's happening. So you're above the book, you're way above the world you're seeing. Your eye level is way up here somewhere. The parallel edges of that book it's laying in front of you go way out into space, right and left, because it's such a subtle angle. And they'll meet, if you could map all this out, they would meet at 2 points, left and right, on that horizon line that is your eye level. Okay, so this would all work out. You could do this. This is how people make these really complex, if you ever see Italian Renaissance paintings of, so the masters who do these architectural kind of renderings or paintings of these, complicated pieces of architecture. This is how they do it. They would lay the drawing, their initial drawing, on the table, or on the, they're kind of use sketches to kind of get the look of everything because they didn't have a camera back then. Take it back to the studio, put it on the wall, make a detailed drawing of their sketches, map everything out to 2 vanishing points if they're using 2-point scheme. So every window ledge, every horizontal line in their drawing would go to one or the other vanishing points. Map it all out perfectly. So that, they have to get those vanishing points out far enough and they'd be able to figure that out. So every line in their drawing would converge on one of those 2 vanishing points, and that's what gives the drawing consistency. And it echoes what is happening in real life, okay? So know that this is not just kind of an invented scenario, this 2-point scheme. Those lines would really converge at 2 vanishing points if you could do that, if you could manufacture that scenario, like I did here on a big wall, and map out those angles. So that's how they are able to really get real complicated with their drawings, because all they have to do is take a piece of string and stretch it to one of the other vanishing points. They get a particular angle of a particular window ledge or something like that, right? Okay, it's really easy once you get that system going, okay? The trick is getting the proper angles to begin with by observing nature, real life, right? And understanding the trajectory of those to find those vanishing points. Once you do that, then it's a system that just falls together, okay? It falls into place, okay? So I could make a stack of books there, by the way. Real quick here, let me just show you. You can see it. Let me blow it up here, because this will just drive home the illustration, I think. So if I made that into a stack of books that's laying on the table, vertical line, right? Vertical line. So the partner of this one, which would be up here, would get a little flatter because it's going down to that, right? So each one of these lines would go to the vanishing point, right? This would get a little flatter just because it's tipping down to that. This is the back one, but the back one is parallel to this one, so it has to obey that too as well, okay? So I could kind of start inventing forms here, based on reality. Well, that's not quite correct, but each one of those lines would go converge up to there, right? So let's say the painting's bigger than this, like it's a tall vertical drawing, okay? Let's keep going up with the stack of books. Watch what happens. These are still vertical, so I'm going to do the left side of the stack of the books here. Watch what happens to the top line now. See how much more horizontal that is, right? Because it's closer to the horizon line. It's closer to your eye level. If that stack of books kept going up to eye level, that'd be a horizontal line, wouldn't it? The top of that stack of books. Went above eye level, all of a sudden that stack of books will move downward to the vanishing point. Okay, so it's a microcosm of a larger world, essentially, right? So those lines would all tilt down to the vanishing point till they got to the horizon line, and they start tilting up. I'm not going to kind of stretch every one out to there, but get it? So whatever happening with this book there is just a small part of the bigger picture, and that bigger picture includes the 2 vanishing points at which those parallel edges on that book obey, to which those parallel edges go to. Okay? I know it's complicated, but there's those angles you are striking would terminate at 2 vanishing points if it's a 2-point scheme. Okay, so you can make your put your book at any angle. What happens if it something like that? All of a sudden, this edge gets more vertical, right? That edge right there gets way more vertical. Used to be this, now it's this, and then this edge flattens out, right? So, it changes the whole picture of the book, right? Changes the whole dynamic. Okay. Any questions? No? Make your marks with precision, but rapidly. It's still like a sketch, but you're just cutting those lines into the drawing along that edge. Okay, don't make it. You're making 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 of them to start to whittle out the form of the book, but don't freehand it. Okay, because this notion of straight edge and angle is really important in this drawing because it's a piece of architecture. Okay, it's a book. It's geometric form. And then make it into a 6-sided figure, and then slowly start to whittle it into a book. Don't spend a ton of time on it. I just want you to play around with it a little bit, so not a lot of pressure on you, but just enough to start to kind of play with visual measurement in combination with angle approximation. Okay. And then imagine doing that with the world around you, sitting at a table, looking at your room. Okay, gets real kind of. I do that all the time when I'm taking pictures or thinking about photography too, or video or whatever. What are the angle? How's the composition? How are things? Sooner or later, as an artist, you start seeing the world in a different way. If this trains your eye to see the world in a way that non-artists don't, right? So it makes you a better artist in that regard. Fuller kind of understanding of what's going on. And just a richer kind of experience, altogether, even if you're not going to be an artist. So, okay, any questions? No?
I guess, when is this due?
Yeah, so, Friday or Saturday or something like that. Just a quick rendering. Don't go overboard with it. But if I just see a kind of a cube, a flat cube that's sitting there that feels like you looked at a book to draw it, I'm happy with it. You don't need to do all that kind of detail stuff that I was doing, but starting to think about. But if you want to get into that, that's fine too as well. But this is a case in point. Most people would want to jump into that detail right away in a drawing, right? And so they would do that without understanding the overall structure of the drawing, right? So that's where you get in trouble, and I see that endlessly in this class. And everybody always says, well, I'm really good at detail. Yeah, you are good, but are you good at seeing the forest through the trees? That's the real question. That's what makes a really good artist is they are able to contextualize everything. They're able to contextualize detail, right? So the big picture is the key, right? Not the detail, okay? The detail it happens after you see the big picture. Any art form is that way, right? Any art form is that way. Poetry, music, every art form that you can think about, it's the artist's conceptualization of the whole first, and then how the parts fit together. Okay. An angle is part of that whole scenario, right? What is the angle? How do I see that angle relative to the frame of my drawing, right? The perimeter of my drawing. That's key. I.e., is it close to vertical? Is it close to horizontal? That structural overarching kind of view of the world, right? And that's important. That's kind of what we're talking about here in terms of angle approximation. Okay.